What is up there, workforce? Chris here with Work To Game, and I was just combing through kind of my backlog of videos I'm in the middle of editing, and there was one that kind of slid by me, and it's an older post. It's been several months, and it was something that I didn't run at the time because I wasn't sure if I wanted to run it, but I just watched it, and I think it's an interesting discussion. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything currently going on in gaming per se, but I just thought it was a discussion I could kind of throw up because I haven't been doing a lot of vlog posts lately, and mostly my life's been centered on Charlie, who's asleep at my feet down here. And so I guess with that, enjoy. What's up there, workforce? Chris here with Work To Game, and I haven't done one of these in a while, but I just wanted to sit down and kind of have a vlog post. So I just got home from a card game with some friends. Some of them were friends I've seen a lot over the last several years. Some were ones I hadn't seen in a few years. And some of them were people that I just met. I probably won't be invited back to this group because of some of the things that we're about to talk about. And I got a little defensive about kind of something. And I just wanted to know how you guys felt on the same issues. So this is going to be talking a little bit about kind of the relationship between fake news and gaming, and is gaming good for you, is it not, and just kind of the place that gaming has in society right now, which obviously is something that I struggle with my own bias towards because gaming's been a big part of my life in both healthy and unhealthy ways. So we were hanging out, just chatting, and there was a series of points that were made in a context, and that's where a lot of fake news comes from, is that some of it is very valid or is somewhat valid, and it's wrapped in context, and then we remove the context and we push it to this viral status because we only like to hear about the exciting part, and out of context it doesn't always give the implication of what it was in context, right? So that's how you hear things like, oh, dark chocolate's good for your heart. And it's like, well, there's a compound that's good for your heart in dark chocolate, among other things, that, you know, is good for your heart. But when you take it out of that context, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, then dark chocolate as a whole must be good for you. Well, that's not really what I said. And so what was said tonight, and it was a series of statements, and so I'll try to address all of them. I had a half-hour drive home, and so I've kind of been running through this in my head, and I've talked myself in circles. So gaming is a cause of antisocial behavior. Gaming leads to antisocial behavior. Gaming is bad for society, and it causes people to withdraw, not go outside, not engage. Engaging in person face-to-face is better for you and better for society and is a more honest interaction than online interactions, specifically gaming within that context. And that all negative interactions online spout from people that ideally are gamers and are antisocial by nature. And that a lot of that stems from poor parenting, and that we can blame parenting as a whole for the direction that society is headed. That is all the things that were stated, and it was stated in a series of comments back to back. And when I clarified to try to make sure that I was grasping all of that, that is what was said back to me. So that is what I heard, and I heard it a couple of times. And so some of you may agree with all those points, in which case you're like, well, I don't understand why you're upset, Chris. And some of you may be already as frustrated as I am because there's so many oversimplifications, overly broad statements. And when we started to drill down to facts and what things like studies, the response was typically that studies aren't accurate, that people know because they know. And so that's one of the first issues I have with this. And it's the fact that it can happen in my friend group and within people that I respect and I really enjoy time with, is I think why this really hits close to home. Because you always think that out in the world there's people in this group and there's people in this group, and I disagree with this group, but they're over there, and people in my group totally get me. But when you get around a group of people who are all a lot like you, and you get along in so many ways, and they say this, it's like when you find out that like there's a core belief that you have that your parents or a brother or a close friend have that's totally opposite, and you didn't know. And you're like, well, how could you have come to that conclusion? Like, I thought we were so much in line that when we talk about something that to me only makes sense one way, I really struggle to see the other viewpoint. And so when we talk about whether or not you understand something and how it's true doesn't make it untrue. So not knowing how something works, not knowing how a cell phone works doesn't change the fact that it works. So one of my issues with the way people have disregarded science in the last several years, very, very publicly, is that if they can't see the facts, if they can't understand the facts, and they believe something to be true, that they can just say it's true. And so when we talk about that and we put that in the context of gaming, the first thing they talked about was gaming and antisocial behavior. There have been multiple times that people have gone and said studies that gaming can help with autism, gaming can help with dyslexia, gaming can help with PTSD, that gaming can lead to better hand-eye coordination, gaming can lead to, more social interaction for people who typically may live in an area. Say you struggle with something like childhood obesity or dyslexia or a disfigurement of some kind, or really anything else that typically society would kind of ostracize you for, or maybe a local community or a middle school or a high school would say you're different than us and you can sit on the outside. Well, the internet is this place where you can at the very least find other people like you, but oftentimes hide behind an avatar in Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft, where outside of the fact that I choose to share my face with you guys, I don't have to. So you guys would never have to know what I look like. And many of you probably don't know what I look like below here. So like I could have wheels for legs. I could be walking around on one pogo stick and you would have no idea. And so if I'm afraid to share that with you, I don't have to. And so there's this thing that's afforded to you by the internet, and there are positives to go with the negatives. And so my issue wasn't that they saw the negatives, because yes, gaming addiction, as along with any other addiction, is something that's very real, and the negative attributes of gaming are very apparent. But one of my issues with this was that so much of it was placed on gaming, and that's not fair. Gaming is the newest and easiest thing to blame because it's the newest established form of media. When you look at things like video content, so movies, TV, these days now streaming things like YouTube, and you trace that back to radio, which was traced back to things like live performance and print media, and so you follow all the various forms, and then you look at things like sport. So you look at, fighting, track and field, basketball, football, all the sports that have been entertainment, recreation as a whole has been part of organized society, meaning any group of people living in a collective, acting as a group where social dynamics begin to form. Recreation has been around since forever. It has just always been a part of games, and the games have changed and the entertainment has changed over the years as technology and as resources have changed and as social conduct has changed. And so gaming is just one of the newer things, and it's easy to dismiss because it's so young. You're looking at 20, 30, 40 years old for most technologies within gaming, and that includes, so anytime you see something that like our parents, my parents, can remember a time before, it's easy to dismiss. You see the same things in religion, political ideas, anything like that. There's this certain amount of like credibility that's given to anything simply for being old. Whether or not that's valid or not is another debate, but there is a certain amount of validity that's given to religions or political ideas or sources of entertainment that have been around a long time. So your kids playing baseball, your kids getting coached to play baseball, your kids wanting to be professional baseball players, that is an acceptable thing for a kid to say. But wanting to be a professional gamer and wanting to be coached in gaming and wanting to spend your time gaming for a source of a living as an adult, when you start to talk about streamers, content creators, players, commentators, developers, that is still seen as relatively weird and relatively childish by many people in society. And I don't really think that that's a fair thing, because they're just not drawing the parallel because it's so new. And that's fine. But where I really started to have an issue with the things that were said tonight, and I wanted to kind of talk about with you guys, because maybe these thoughts are more pervasive than I think they are. Maybe they're out there just in the world a lot more than I thought they were, is that gaming is bad for you, and that gaming is this addiction, and that it leads to antisocial behavior. They base that on the fact that they feel that most antisocial people they know or hear about are gamers, but that's not really how the scientific method works. So if you were to try to take a true scientific method, you can't just say, well, the people who are addicted to heroin are negatively affected by opioids. Well, that's not really fair. You have to say, okay, here's a collective group of people who have access to something and here's some who don't. And then look at the percentage that are negatively affected by it. So if you take the world population right now that has access to gaming and you look at it, a percentage of them have chosen to engage and a percentage of them have not chosen to engage, but they've all had the option, right? If we just take the group of the people who currently have the resources, time, availability to get into gaming, a percentage of them, my wife has chosen not to game, right? She plays my Switch sometimes, but ultimately in life, she spends very little time over the total percentage of her life gaming. And so any behavior she has can't really be linked to gaming because it's not a major influence in her life. I, on the other hand, choose to make gaming a very big part of my life. So my behaviors may or may not be affected by gaming. What you would then have to do is you would have to take an identically large group of people, big enough that you could overcome statistical anomalies like my personality as an individual, and then you would run them in a world where there is no access to gaming. There is no ability to game. And you would have to see, do the same antisocial behaviors present themselves, do the same behaviors as society as a whole present themselves, and you would have to leave all other factors the same. And so that's not really possible. And my issue is that people are implying that if we removed gaming, society would get better, and I don't think that gaming has that big of a negative role right now. I mean, you're saying that everything said negatively on Twitter is not what's causing it. There's just too many things that the political discourse right now. And they kept listing off all these examples. Well, look at all these people being jerks on Twitter and look at some of our politicians that are being jerks and look at the news media that are being jerks. And my problem was that all the examples they gave were people who I wouldn't think of as gamers. So then they said, well, those people should be outside and that face-to-face interaction is better. But I go back to my first point in that face-to-face interaction, while it is important and it develops certain aspects of empathy and realism and it gives us context and grounding in the world. So it is important that you go interact with people in real life sometimes. That when you see these negative things, the example that was given tonight was racist comments. So when you see racist comments on social media, as an example of antisocial behavior, of behavior that is against the established and accepted constructs of society, that behavior is in that person whether or not they're expressing it. And so my counterpoint was, okay, so if they're helping somebody in a parking lot who fits the group that they typically stereotype or discriminate against online, and then they get in their car and they immediately say, you wouldn't believe how I just had to help this person of this group, and they say something very negative, which moment is a more honest and open representation of that person? If you believe that face-to-face interaction is better and healthier 100% in every way, which is what they were saying, this is why I don't like absolutes. And it's why when anybody says absolutes, the more absolute somebody is, the more absolutely wrong I feel they must be, because the world is just full of gray areas. That I don't feel that the in-person was 100% them. Online didn't make them have those racist thoughts. They already had them, but they didn't feel they could express them in their actions in person, and they did feel they could express them online. It's like when people say he's a mean drunk. Your inhibitions are part of who you are. Your ability to withhold, your ability to have respect for another person by not saying something, not saying you don't look good in that shirt. That is a part of your personality, but it's not all of your personality. So what alcohol does, in my opinion, is it removes that. It removes those inhibitions. And so it allows you to do things without necessarily thinking through the context of judgment and what repercussions could be and what it will do to that person. And so you can say and do things that you wouldn't typically do because your inhibitions and what would normally stop you isn't there. And so who you are as a drunk is part of you. So if you're mean as a drunk, in my mind, you do need to ask yourself, where did that mean come from? Because the alcohol didn't make you mean. you had those thoughts. Now, those thoughts may have been because of something very recent. Maybe you lost your job today, or maybe something like that. Or they may be these big underlying things where it's you've been frustrated at that person for a very long time and you really haven't had a chance to express it. And they said something that normally makes you kind of go, "Urgh." And instead, because you were drunk, you did something stupid and you hit him in the face. And you've always thought, man, I wish I could hit him in the face, but I can't. And then because of alcohol, that moment didn't happen. So you just did it. And so that's kind of my thought on that. And so when you talk about gaming being healthy, there is something nice about being able to interact, and it's not the same as social media. On Twitter or Facebook or whatever, there's not a reason to have people align with me. And in gaming, when I'm in like, especially in the context of they were really heavily aiming towards cooperative games. They were aiming very, very heavily towards things like WoW and 14, which is why I was so defensive in this conversation. So I was trying to keep my own bias out of it, but you know, that's impossible. And I feel that it's so cooperative. You're on a team. And so even if that person on my team is of a different belief system than me, of a different communication style than me, of a totally different personality, and is not somebody I would choose to actively have in my life or actively have at my wedding or have over for dinner, they might still be somebody who I party with. They might still be somebody who I run content with. They might be somebody in your guild. And you don't have to, you're not marrying them. They're just a friend in that context, in the context of your guild. And so you can be broader. And I think that that's a really healthy thing, that gives you exposure to people that if you had to choose, everybody is either spouse quality or not, and it was pass fail, you would never be exposed to anything, because you would have to always agree with them to the level that I agree with my wife on things. And I would never be exposed to other ideas. Instead, I can take this core thing and I can say, you like games? I like games. That's enough. Let's build a friendship based on that. And then because we've anchored it on something like that, now you can have different political ideas than me, different religious ideas than me, different economic ideas than me, different, you know, whatever. And I get exposed to those because we're held together by that tether that is gaming. And so I think gaming has caused me to have friendships with people that I wouldn't normally be friends with. And I feel like I'm rambling on, but I just wanted to get these thoughts out. I don't really know what this subject is called, so whatever title I decide on, it's late at night, I'm going to edit this in the morning, so whatever title I decide on, I don't know that it accurately wraps all this up because I've kind of just talked. But I feel better, so thank you guys for hearing me out. And I think that was my issue tonight. I don't know if I actually ever stated an issue or how I feel about it, but I'm not sure that that gaming can be attributed to antisocial behavior. I do think that, you know, if somebody suffers from PTSD, I have friends that have served and I thank them for their service. And I think that some of them, I think they are largely different than who they were when they left, like any other life-shaping event. And so some of them don't appreciate being exposed to violence. So that means no Saving Private Ryan. That means no Call of Duty. That means no bar fights. That means no fights on TV. That means we don't talk about fights. We don't talk about violence around them because it can make them very uncomfortable. And I catch myself when we get to talking about something like a fight or like military service or whatever, and they get up and leave the room, that kind of makes me realize, like, I've probably negatively affected this person's day, and I didn't mean to because of what that does, because of experiences they've had that I don't relate to. But to say that all gaming, I can't take something that big. How do I know that World of Warcraft isn't a chance to go into a game and gather herbs and mine and interact with the economy and just have these friends online who don't know that when you start to talk about something, they probably don't like that they have to leave the room when they get uncomfortable. But online, you can just say, oh, sorry, I was AFK. And so, like, I think there's a lot of beauty in the anonymity that games offer. And I think that to villainize an entire industry is short-sighted and is a lack of understanding and a lack of desire to have understanding. It is saying that because I don't make quilts, that if somebody wants to say the whole quilting industry is just full of jerks who have no concept of, economic value and they don't provide value to their families and they know nothing about anything, because that doesn't affect me, I can just go, yeah, that seems fair. And that's just not a generalization you should ever allow. And you need to be really careful with generalizations going out and villainizing an entire group of people, especially if it's a group of people that you're not a part of and you do not understand. Because to say that these people are not better off for gaming as opposed to what they would be doing instead. I don't think going outside makes you fit. I think that is obvious by the number of people in society that don't play video games who are not fit, whether or not they're ever outside. And I don't think that if we weren't playing games that we wouldn't just be sitting around watching TV and watching Netflix. And I think that a lot of times as closing thoughts, a lot of times when we have a core set of beliefs and we lock into them so hard and we don't open up our minds and look at the evidence and try to look at the evidence with as unbiased of a view as possible. I know it's impossible to leave your biases totally at the door, but to really try to go in open-minded and focus on it, that we miss out on the opportunity to see the world in a different way. Because, for example, one of the examples I brought up tonight was that when you look at Microsoft's Game Pass, it is logical to think that when you have a subscription-based model to get access to a ever-changing library that is very large, like a Netflix-style thing, that you would buy less movies because you have a Netflix subscription. So as there are more and more game subscriptions to a type of media, that the overall sales of that type of media would decline for any movie that chose to opt into that service. That's what's logical to me. I would never buy a movie that's available on Netflix. But actually, Game Pass has shown quite the opposite. Game Pass has shown an increase in the sales of those games and of games in general. And now we can never track that with Netflix because there's too many publishers, there's too many streaming platforms, there's too many ways that the numbers aren't shared, and there's no way to say it was a movie. Were these two equal movies? Were they expected to have equal sales, DVD sales, and then one was pushed to Netflix and one was not? And it's too many moving parts, but when you talk about gaming, it's a really unique moment because we have everything under one umbrella where Microsoft can say, okay, we have our in-house games. We're going to push them. We can now look at the set of people who have chosen to opt in Game Pass and look at those users and their past purchase data because we have it all. And now we can say, okay, now are they on a historically higher path of spending money on buying games with us than users who have been users with us for the same amount of time, have similar profiles, but who have chosen not to get into Game Pass? And the evidence so far shows that they spend more time on Xbox and they buy more games. So I think that it's really awesome when the world turns on its head, and you have to not think in absolutes to get there. I think that's what it took me 22 minutes to say. Once again, thank you guys so much for listening to me just ramble on. This is probably the single largest vlog I've ever shot. It's just in length, not necessarily in quality of content. So for any of you still sticking around, have a fantastic day. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think on all this. I know there wasn't like a concise thought or question or answer, but any or all of it, anywhere you'd like to continue the conversation. I think I got a lot more frustrated than I wanted to, and I spent the last 30 minutes winding down, and I just came in and hit record, and this is what that looks like without editing. So I will see you guys next time. Hopefully a whole lot more upbeat. It's kind of late at night. Talk to you later.
Thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to check out any other videos, you should click over here. And then we've got like some kind of vlog thing down here in the corner. And then we've got like subscribe. Yeah, like that's really, you should totally do it. This was a complete disaster.